we do make a fair, transparent chance for them to have a say and show, okay, are you doing a good job? Are you actually providing good services? That could go away if we're not able to protect the agency from these attacks and attempts to shut us down.
Which side are you on?
We have on the line now, really excited to welcome to the Valley Labor Report for the first time. I don't know how it took us so long to get them on the show, but the National Treasury Employees Union's National President, Doreen Greenwald, and NTEU Chapter President at the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Kat Farman. Greenwald, Farman, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thanks for having us.
We really appreciate it. And I know that y'all are incredibly busy with all of the work that's going on. So we want to talk to you about some of that. And so, Farman, I want to start with you. And can you explain to us what the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is?
Yes, thanks for having us. So the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, we are the federal government agency that regulates the biggest banks in the country. And we are an agency that works for you, not the banks and not for the CEOs. The CFPB, we protect working people from predatory practices from financial companies like predatory mortgages, loans. We regulate student loans. We regulate credit card companies. And we are here to protect the American worker from getting scammed by greedy Wall Street CEOs. We are the company that, when Wells Fargo was ripping people off, creating fraudulent bank accounts and charging imaginary fake fees and charges to their customers in order to up their sales numbers, we were the agency that made them pay you back to the tune of billions of dollars, right? That they stole from working people who are their customers, and that we made them pay back to those people. And something that we have tried to implement, but have been stymied under the current Trump administration, that would also help the average person massively, is we had put a rule that was supposed to go into effect in March to remove medical debt, cancel medical debt from Americans' credit reports. So that would mean that the pressures on people to pay off impossible amounts of medical debt through no fault of their own, right, through these threats from debt collectors and health insurance companies would no longer exist, because they wouldn't have that threat of ruining your credit score so that you can't get out a loan, you can't get a mortgage, you can't buy a home, you can't get a car. So that was set to go into place in March, and that has been challenged under the current administration and by the Republican Party in Congress. They're trying to undo that rule. Really, there's only one explanation, which is that they work for the CEOs, for the health insurance companies, for the greedy billionaires who want to continue to exploit you and me. And they want to put a stop to anything that would at all protect the average working person from being exploited. So that is what the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau work is. And under this administration, that's the kind of thing that is being stymied and pretty much put to a stop, and will be permanently damaged, stopped, repealed, undone, shut down if the Trump administration gets its way and they're able to lay off our workforce, which is what they've been trying to do since February. And our union has so far successfully held them off from being able to accomplish.
Well, Kat, I don't know about you, but that all sounds like woke and weaponized nonsense. And I'm really glad that we have somebody that's really thinking about the lenders today. I mean, it's really important that we have somebody making sure that they, that the billionaires get the money from the people who chose to get cancer. We really need to make sure that these folks are treated fairly. Obviously, I'm being facetious, and I also just want to mention that Kat is not speaking on behalf of the CFPB. She is speaking in her personal capacity and as a member of the National Treasury Employees Union. But I really think that gets to, the valuable work that the CFPB does, and how, and also just a couple of other numbers that Rohit Chopra has talked about, the agency has been able to deliver $20 billion back to the American people from fraudsters. And that obviously doesn't even take into account the amount of money that Americans saved by the fraudsters being put on watch, that there's a cop walking around on the beat, right? I mean, do you have any idea, like, what is the scale that we're talking about on, how much people were saved by not being defrauded in the first place because they knew that the CFPB was out there? Has there been any research done on that?
We certainly know that, yeah, like you said, the $21 billion and that have been returned to Americans that was otherwise just would have been stolen, right, from these companies. That's what we've been able to provide just in the short time we've been operating. And we also return more than we spend. So for every dollar that we spend on this work that we do, almost $3 is paid back to American consumers. So there's a huge return for the investment of putting this work, making it happen, and having oversight over these companies. And talking about the scale, so when I talked about the medical debt rule that's been stymied so far, there's that right there is $50 billion that is on Americans' credit reports. That's medical debt. Right now, that would go away, would no longer be on people's medical, on their credit report, on your credit score. It would no longer be a pressure, a barrier to you getting fair access to mortgages, auto loans, student loans, these things that you need in our economy. You need them in order to be able to survive, right? You cannot be a working person in America and really not have credit in this economy. You kind of rely on it. We have a consumer-based economy, and the American people have to buy into that. For the most part, you have to play the game to be able to sort of work and have access to the things you need to have a job and support your family in this economy. And so people really can't opt out of this system, right? When that's the case, the fact that these companies do want to rip you off, they do want to exploit you, they do want to be able to get as much from you, and the pressures on their own workforce we've heard about from their own workers. So actually, there's Wells Fargo Workers United is the union that's organized Wells Fargo employees at multiple locations. And they have put out a report in April talking about how the same sales tactics, the high pressure sales tactics that were used that caused the previous instances not that long ago that ripped off customers are back in place now. And only in the last few months of this current Trump administration basically having us not doing any oversight, they've already begun to see that pressure, those high pressure sales tactics return, and see exploitative practices that hurt consumers and customers are already back in full swing. And they've been sounding alarm about that. And they actually have some insight into that too, because of the consumer complaint database, which is one piece of the CFPB that is currently actually still functional and operating, thanks again to our union's efforts suing to maintain the CFPB's functionality. That has been able to come back online, even though it was initially shut down, so that the Wells Fargo Workers United actually saw and published in their report the number of consumer complaints against Wells Fargo this year alone has already gone up compared to previous years. And so that is the kind of transparency that we provide into what's going on. And that's also the kind of accountability, like you said, these poor, greedy companies and billionaires, like, oh my gosh, looking out, who's looking out for them? Well, if they would like to have their, themselves represented in a fair way, they can do a good job responding to these complaints, and that will actually get published on the consumer complaint database that we make open data publicly available to anybody who wants to see it online. And if they were able to be responsive and actually invested in good customer service, if they resolved issues, they would see complaints would go down for their companies, right? They wouldn't have, relative to their market share, their size, or their customer base, they wouldn't have a high number of complaints compared to maybe other companies who don't invest in those good practices that support their customers and that provide reasonable responses and that actually try to fix issues instead of trying to exploit them to make money. So we do make a fair, transparent chance for them to have a say and show, okay, are you doing a good job? Are you actually providing good services for people who rely or have to use your services? They have to choose somebody to get a credit card or a bank account. And if you're not, that also shows up there. So they do have that opportunity. And that's one of the functionalities that is currently still being preserved that, we're sort of sounding the alarm about too. That's at risk. Even that bit of insight into what's going on in these financial companies and with Americans who are using them, that could go away if we're not able to protect the agency from these attacks and attempts to shut us down.
Hey, 5 seconds, just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
And so speaking of those attacks, we've gone back and forth, I think, both at the CFPB and at several other agencies. Folks have been fired, folks have been rehired. Some folks have been placed on administrative leave, and some folks have been fired again. Some folks have been rehired again. I mean, can you briefly walk us through the timeline at the CFPB and explain where we're at right now?
So we're currently still employed. Thumbs up
good.
there.
We love to hear that.
So that's that's a start, right? That's like baseline. If we're going to have functional consumer protection, again, we need people who can carry out those functions. And so the fact that we're still employed is baseline minimum. Okay, there's people who can actually carry out this work. But what's happened is as soon as we got the Trump appointees in, this happened in early February for us, they started meddling and trying to basically shut us down and fire people so that we couldn't have any consumer protection functions that were happening. And that included firing 200 workers in February. And then they had plans on Valentine's Day on February 14th to fire 1,000 more workers and lay us off. And those didn't happen only because the same day through the NTEU lawsuit that I keep referencing, we were able to get a temporary restraining order to pause any layoffs. And so what's happened, there's been a lot of back and forth that you've mentioned in the courts since then, various orders. It's at an appeals court stage now. I'm not a lawyer. I am actually a coder. I'm a web developer. That's what I came to CFPB to do. And I'm the union president now. But I've had to learn some of the legal, happenings and to be able to keep up with this. But basically where we're at now is that there's been additional layoff attempts that we've been able to stop through temporary pauses by federal judges who have seen that the way this is being carried out is basically this leadership, which includes the author of Project 2025. His name is Russ Vought. Look this guy up. He's a proud radical Christian nationalist. And this is the guy who thinks that actually Trump should have more power to make the government be able to ignore Congress and the other branches in order to basically do whatever he wants. So that's Russ Vought. He's tried to lay off 1,500 out of our 1,700 workers just a few weeks ago, and we were able to put a stop to that. So that's when I received a termination notice that I was going to be laid off. And we would have lost access the next day to all of our computer systems and, basically be waiting out the rest of our time until the layoffs went into effect. And that we also were able to stop. So it's been very, as you can imagine, disruptive. Somewhere in that time, we had about 3 weeks. Nobody was working because we were under stop work orders. And that meant that bank examiners, these are people who were hired as compliance officers, basically external to banks, would go in. They used to travel and go on site into the financial institutions, the big banks, to make sure, are they following the law? Are they actually doing the consumer protection law and requirements they're supposed to? And of course, when they're not, because they're not always, they were there to catch them and to get them to basically in real time make changes to follow the law. And if they didn't, that was able to be something that could end up in a lawsuit from our agency. So those folks, we have hundreds of people who that's their job. Their primary job is to go on site to the biggest banks and hold them accountable under consumer protection law and make sure that they're complying. Those people have been grounded. They haven't been able to do that. And then those 3 weeks when nobody was working, our consumer complaint database was also down. We had 75 Americans report imminent foreclosures in that time who were not able to get those complaints responded to. Those normally get escalated very quickly because people are about to lose their home. And so if they have a complaint, then we make sure that we get the bank, the mortgage lender, the institution to respond to it quickly and resolve it so that we can try to prevent home loss. That wasn't happening because we weren't being allowed to work. These are sort of the things that happened that we've undone. So some of those things are back on. The consumer complaints are back on. If someone has an imminent foreclosure today, they should get, a response. It will probably be slower because there's a backlog still from when we were shut down. And there's other things that haven't been turned back on. So our compliance examiners are still grounded. They're not going on site to any of these institutions. We're talking about hundreds of institutions that the CFPB oversees in this country. So we have hundreds of examiners who would theoretically be part of that oversight that are not doing that oversight. So we want everybody to know, if you're watching this or listening, that means that the biggest banks in the country right now are operating lawlessly with zero oversight. They are not having to follow consumer protection laws, or if they aren't, that's not necessarily known to the regulator, us, who would be there to make sure that's happening. So if they are starting to do more illegal practices, abusive practices, exploitative practices, preying on the American people, we don't have insight into that in real time the way that we're supposed to, that we're set up exactly to do.
Right. I also just want to share this bit from some information from ProPublica reporter Jake Pearson about some of the conflicts of interest of some of the Doge Bros who have been attacking the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Last month, a Department of Government Efficiency aide at the nation's consumer watchdog agency was told by ethics attorneys that he held stocks in companies that employees are forbidden from owning and was advised not to participate in any actions that could benefit from him personally. So this is not like, oh, I own stocks and I didn't know. He was warned about this. But days later, court records show Gavin Kleiger, a 25-year-old software engineer who has been detailed to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau since early March, went ahead and participated in mass layoffs at the agency anyway, including the firings of the ethics lawyers who had warned him. Kleiger owns as much as $365,000 of shares in Apple, Tesla, and 2 cryptocurrencies, according to his public financial reports. Investments in those businesses are off limits to employees since the Bureau can regulate them. A further review now shows that he's invested in even more companies that are on the agency's prohibited holdings list. Kleiger also disclosed owning as much as $350,000 worth of stock in Google parent company Alphabet and Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway and the Chinese e-commerce company Alibaba. This means at a maximum, Kleiger could own as much as $715,000 of investments in 7 barred companies at 25 years old, which I'm sure he got from his really hard work. Experts said that a defanged and downsized consumer watchdog is unlikely to aggressively regulate those and other companies, freeing them of compliance costs and the risk associated with examinations and enforcement actions that in turn could boost their stock prices and benefit investors like Kleiger. Don Fox, a former general counsel of the independent federal agency that advises executive branch workers on their ethical obligations, said, quote, "This looks like a pretty clear-cut violation of the federal criminal conflict of interest statute. I don't see how it could be any other way. It is just astounding that this kind of stuff is happening in broad daylight." And I really appreciate, Kat talking to us about what's been happening and how that is going to affect working people.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.